Millionaire marries a waitress, his friends are stunned when they discover her past. The chandelier above the expansive ballroom cast 1,000 golden lights across the polished marble floor, refracting like diamonds against the glittering gowns and tailored suits of the assembled guests. Whispers rippled through the room like an undercurrent, subtle but unmistakable. The object of their curiosity stood near the center, her delicate frame wrapped in a simple yet elegant dress that seemed almost out of place among the opulence. Emily smiled nervously as Jonathan gently squeezed her hand, his grip both reassuring and firm. She could feel the weight of the stares, the silent judgment of a crowd that had spent their lives navigating wealth and privilege. It wasn't just the grandeur of the event that made her uncomfortable, it was the knowledge that these people weren't looking at her as an equal. To them, she was an anomaly, a curiosity, a question they were too polite to ask outright but too intrigued to ignore. "How does a waitress end up here?" the whispers asked, even if the words weren't spoken aloud. Jonathan, oblivious to, or perhaps purposefully ignoring, the murmurs, leaned close and whispered in her ear. "You're doing great." Emily forced a smile and nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She'd agreed to attend the event to support him, knowing how important it was to his career and the foundation he was spearheading. But now, under the weight of their collective gaze, she wondered if she had made a mistake. One woman, her diamonds glittering as brightly as the chandelier above, approached with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Jonathan," she said warmly, her gaze flickering to Emily, "aren't you going to introduce us?" Jonathan turned smoothly, his charm effortless. "Of course. Emily, this is Victoria. She's been a long-time supporter of the foundation. Victoria, this is Emily, my fiancée." The word hung in the air like a revelation, and Victoria's smile faltered ever so slightly. "Fiancée? Well, I must say I'm surprised." "Pleasantly, I hope," Jonathan said, his tone light but with an edge that made it clear he wasn't interested in entertaining negativity. "Of course," Victoria said quickly, though her eyes lingered on Emily with thinly veiled curiosity. "It's always lovely to see someone new join our circle." Emily felt her cheeks flush, but she managed a polite smile. "Thank you. I'm still learning the ropes." "I'm sure you are," Victoria replied before excusing herself, her expression inscrutable. Jonathan turned to Emily, his brow furrowing slightly. "Don't let them get to you," he said softly. "I'm fine," Emily lied. She wasn't. But she didn't want to ruin the evening for him, not when he had fought so hard to bring her into this world. Later that evening, as they sat in the back of the car, Emily stared out the window at the passing lights of the city. Jonathan reached over and took her hand, his thumb brushing against her skin. "Talk to me," he said gently. She hesitated, then sighed. I feel like I don't belong. Like I'm an outsider looking in." Jonathan frowned. "You're not an outsider to me. You're my partner. My equal." "I know that," she said, turning to face him. "But to them, I'm just a waitress. Someone who doesn't fit in their perfect little world. That's their problem, not yours," he said firmly. "They don't know you the way I do. And if they're too blind to see how incredible you are, that's on them." His words brought a small smile to her lips, but the doubt lingered. She knew he meant well, but she also knew the truth. She was different. Her past was different. And no matter how hard she tried, that difference would always set her apart. Emily's mind wandered back to the diner where she had first met Jonathan. It was a late afternoon, and the lunch rush had just ended. She had been wiping down tables, humming along to the soft tune playing on the radio, when he walked in. At first, she hadn't recognized him. To her, he was just another customer, well-dressed, sure, but not someone who immediately commanded attention. He had taken a seat at the counter, glancing at the menu as if he wasn't quite sure what to order. "Coffee?" she had asked, offering him a friendly smile. He had looked up, his gaze meeting hers, and something about the way he smiled back made her heart skip a beat. "Yeah. Coffee sounds great." As she poured his cup, they began to chat. It started casually, comments about the weather, a light joke about the diner's retro decor, but it quickly became clear that there was something different about him. He was curious about her, asking questions that went beyond the usual pleasantries. "How long have you worked here?" he'd asked, his tone genuinely interested. "About a year," she'd replied. "It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills." "I can tell you take pride in what you do," he'd said, surprising her. "I try," she'd admitted, her cheeks warming under his gaze. Over the next few weeks, Jonathan became a regular at the diner. He always sat at the counter, always ordered coffee, and always made a point to talk to her. At first, she thought he was just being friendly, but as their conversations deepened, she realized he was genuinely interested in her. It wasn't until their fourth or fifth conversation that she learned who he really was. Another customer, recognizing him, had whispered loudly to their companion, "That's Jonathan Reed, the millionaire philanthropist. What's he doing in a place like this?" Emily had frozen, suddenly self-conscious. But Jonathan, noticing her discomfort, had leaned in and said quietly, "Don't let it change how you see me. I'm still just a guy who enjoys good coffee and great conversation." His words had disarmed her, and from that moment on, their bond only grew stronger. Emily's memories of their early days together brought a warmth to her heart, even as the cold judgment of the wealthy world she now found herself in lingered. She knew Jonathan loved her for who she was, not for her past or her circumstances. But that didn't erase the nagging feeling that she was walking on a tightrope, one misstep away from confirming everyone's doubts about her. The ride back to Jonathan's penthouse was quiet but not uncomfortable. He kept his hand in hers the entire way, offering silent reassurance. As they stepped into the elevator, he turned to her, his brow furrowed with concern. "I know tonight wasn't easy," he said softly, "but I hope you know how proud I am of you." Emily smiled faintly, leaning into him. "I do. And I'm proud of you too." "For what?" he asked, his tone light but curious. "For being the kind of man who doesn't care what anyone thinks," she replied. "Even when it would be easier to go along with them." He kissed the top of her head as the elevator doors opened, leading them into the sprawling apartment. Emily marveled at the space as she always did, even though she had been there dozens of times. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, the lights twinkling like stars. Jonathan poured them each a glass of wine, and they settled onto the couch. For a while, they simply sat in comfortable silence, the weight of the evening slowly lifting. "Can I ask you something?" he said after a while, his tone hesitant. "Of course," Emily replied, turning to face him. "Why does it feel like you're holding back?" he asked gently. "Like there's a part of you you're not sharing with me." Emily stiffened, the question hitting closer to home than she would have liked. She set her glass down, her fingers fidgeting in her lap. "It's not that I don't trust you," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just complicated." Jonathan reached for her hand, his grip warm and steady. "I don't care how complicated it is. I just want to know you, all of you." She took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on their intertwined fingers. "There are things about my past that I haven't told you. Things I'm not proud of." "Like what?" he asked, his tone free of judgment. She hesitated, then finally looked up at him. "My family. We weren't always poor. My dad was a successful businessman, respected, wealthy, influential. But that all came crashing down when he got caught up in a scandal." Jonathan's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "He lost everything," Emily continued, her voice trembling. "His reputation, his business, our home, it was all gone. And with it went the life we knew. My mom tried to hold things together, but the stress was too much. She got sick, and we couldn't afford the treatment she needed. She died when I was 17. Jonathan's heart ached at the pain in her voice. "Emily, I'm so sorry." She shook her head, forcing a small, bitter smile. "I've spent years trying to outrun that part of my life. I thought if I worked hard enough, kept my head down, I could start fresh. But it's always there, lurking in the background." He cupped her face in his hands, his gaze filled with unwavering affection. "Your past doesn't define you. What you've been through, what you've overcome, it's part of what makes you so incredible." Tears welled in her eyes, and she leaned into him, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Thank you." As the days passed, Emily felt a sense of relief in having shared her story with Jonathan. He didn't see her as broken or damaged. He saw her as strong and resilient. But the rest of the world wasn't as kind. At a charity gala hosted by one of Jonathan's friends, the whispers about Emily reached a fever pitch. It started innocently enough, questions about her background, her education, her family. But as the evening wore on, the tone shifted. "Did you hear? She's the daughter of that guy who went bankrupt years ago," someone murmured. "I knew she looked familiar," another replied. "What a fall from grace." Emily overheard the comments, her chest tightening with shame and anger. She tried to brush it off, but the words clung to her like thorns. Jonathan, noticing her discomfort, pulled her aside. "What's wrong?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "Nothing," she lied, forcing a smile. "Emily," he said firmly, his voice soft but insistent. "Talk to me." She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "They know, Jonathan. About my dad, about the scandal, they're talking about it." "Let them talk," he said without hesitation. "They don't know you the way I do." "But they think they do," she said, her voice rising. "And now every time they look at me, that's all they'll see." Jonathan's jaw tightened, his protective instincts kicking in. "Then we'll show them who you really are." Together. The following week, Jonathan hosted a fundraiser at his penthouse, inviting key figures from his network. He made sure Emily was involved in every aspect of the event, highlighting her contributions and putting her front and center. When the night arrived, Emily was nervous but determined. She wore a simple yet elegant gown, her hair swept back to reveal the pendant she always wore, a small, understated piece that had belonged to her mother. As the evening progressed, Emily's natural charm and intelligence began to win people over. She spoke passionately about the causes the fundraiser supported, sharing her own experiences to drive home the importance of giving back. By the end of the night, even some of the most skeptical guests were singing her praises. "She's remarkable," one woman said to Jonathan. "You're lucky to have her." "I know," he replied with a smile, his gaze fixed on Emily as she laughed with a group of volunteers. "I really do." The days following the interview were a whirlwind. Emily found herself at the center of attention, but this time, it wasn't just whispers of scandal or judgment. People were reaching out to express their admiration, their gratitude, and their own stories of overcoming adversity. It was overwhelming, but for the first time, Emily felt a sense of control over her narrative. Jonathan, ever the supportive partner, ensured she had everything she needed to navigate this new chapter. From managing media inquiries to standing by her side at events, he proved time and again that his commitment to her went beyond words. But not everyone was so kind. At a charity luncheon, Victoria reappeared, her smile as sharp as ever. "Emily," she greeted, her tone laced with feigned warmth. "I saw your interview. Quite the performance." Emily smiled politely, refusing to rise to the bait. "Thank you. It was important for me to share my story." "Of course," Victoria said, her gaze narrowing. "Though I couldn't help but wonder, why now? Surely you've had plenty of opportunities before." Jonathan stepped in before Emily could respond, his voice calm but firm. "She shared her story because she wanted to. And because she's brave enough to face her past, unlike some people who hide behind gossip." Victoria's smile faltered, and she quickly excused herself, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Thank you," Emily said softly, looking up at Jonathan. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "I'll always have your back." Despite the support Emily was receiving, the exposure brought new challenges. Reporters began digging deeper into her father's scandal, eager for new angles to sensationalize. Some headlines praised her courage, while others dredged up painful details, twisting them for clicks. Emily tried to focus on the positive, but the negativity began to wear on her. One night, as she and Jonathan sat in the living room, she finally broke down. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "It feels like no matter what I say or do, it's never enough." Jonathan pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "You're doing more than enough," he said gently. "And you're not alone in this. We'll get through it together." "But what if it doesn't stop?" she asked, her voice breaking. "What if it keeps following us?" "Then we'll keep fighting," he said, his tone resolute. "Because you're worth it, Emily. Every bit of it." In the midst of the chaos, Emily found solace in her work with Jonathan's foundation. Together, they launched a new initiative focused on helping families rebuild after financial crises, inspired by Emily's own experiences. The program quickly gained traction, drawing praise from both the public and the philanthropic community. At the program's launch event, Emily gave a heartfelt speech, sharing how her past had shaped her passion for helping others. Her words resonated deeply, earning a standing ovation. As she stepped off the stage, Jonathan was waiting for her, his smile wide with pride. "You were incredible," he said, pulling her into a hug. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied, her voice filled with emotion. "You're giving yourself too little credit," he said. "This is your vision, your story. And people are listening." But as their successes grew, so did the resistance from some corners of society. At an exclusive gala hosted by one of Jonathan's longtime associates, Emily once again found herself the target of subtle jabs. "It's admirable, really," a woman said, her voice dripping with condescension. "How you've managed to turn such a difficult past into something positive." Emily met her gaze evenly, refusing to be intimidated. "I believe our experiences shape us, but they don't define us. What matters is what we do with what we've learned." The woman blinked, momentarily caught off guard by Emily's confidence. "Well, that's certainly a unique perspective." Jonathan, who had overheard the exchange, stepped in with a calm but pointed remark. "It's not just unique, it's inspiring. And it's one of the many reasons I'm proud to call Emily my fiancée." The woman flushed, quickly retreating into the crowd. "You didn't have to do that," Emily said, her voice soft. "I know," he replied, smiling. "But I wanted to." The challenges continued, but so did the victories. Emily's resilience and authenticity began to win over even her harshest critics, and Jonathan's unwavering support solidified their bond. Together, they became a symbol of hope and perseverance, proving that love and determination could overcome even the toughest obstacles. However, just as things seemed to be settling down, a new development threatened to upend everything. A journalist contacted Emily, claiming to have uncovered new information about her father's scandal, details that could either clear his name or reignite the controversy. Emily was torn. Part of her wanted to leave the past buried, to focus on the future she was building with Jonathan. But another part of her knew that the truth, whatever it was, deserved to be told. "I don't know what to do," she admitted to Jonathan one evening, her voice heavy with uncertainty. He took her hand, his gaze steady. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But if this could bring you closure, it might be worth pursuing." She nodded slowly, her mind racing. I'm scared of what we might find." "You've faced worse," he said gently. "And no matter what happens, we'll face it together." Emily couldn't shake the journalist's words. The idea of revisiting her father's scandal felt like reopening a wound that had never fully healed. For years, she had worked to distance herself from the pain, to redefine her life on her own terms. But now, the possibility of uncovering new truths loomed over her like a storm cloud. Jonathan noticed her unease and suggested they take a short trip to clear their minds. "Let's get out of the city," he said one morning over coffee. "Just for a couple of days. You need some space to think." Reluctantly, she agreed. They drove up to a quiet lakeside cabin, a place Jonathan often visited when he needed a break from the chaos of his life. The air was crisp, the lake reflecting the brilliant hues of the setting sun as they arrived. "This is beautiful," Emily said, her voice tinged with awe. "It's one of my favorite places," Jonathan replied, wrapping an arm around her. "I thought you might like it." As they settled in, the stillness of the surroundings began to soothe her restless thoughts. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt like she could breathe. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Emily finally opened up. "What if the truth about my father isn't what I want it to be?" she asked, staring into the flames. Jonathan set his mug down and leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Then at least you'll know. And knowing is always better than wondering." "But what if it changes how people see me?" she continued, her voice trembling. "What if it changes how you see me?" "Emily," he said firmly, taking her hand in his. "Nothing could ever change how I see you. Your past doesn't define you. What you've built, the person you are, that's what matters." She looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. You always make it sound so simple. Because it is, he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. And whatever happens, we'll face it together. The next morning, Emily called the journalist and agreed to meet. Back in the city, they sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, the hum of conversation around them providing a semblance of privacy. I appreciate you agreeing to this, the journalist began. I know it's not easy. What did you find? Emily asked, cutting to the chase. She didn't have the energy for pleasantries. The journalist hesitated, then slid a folder across the table. It's all in there. Financial records, emails, correspondence, everything that was buried during the initial investigation. Emily's hands shook slightly as she opened the folder. The documents revealed a complex web of transactions and decisions, many of which implicated others in her father's downfall. But there was one thing that stood out, a letter her father had written to his business partner just days before the scandal broke. In the letter, he expressed concern about the direction their company was heading, hinting at illegal activities he was unaware of but feared were happening under his nose. He had planned to confront his partner but never got the chance. The partner, it seemed, had used her father as a scapegoat to cover his own tracks. Emily's breath caught as she read the letter. He didn't do it, she whispered, her voice breaking. He was trying to stop it? The journalist nodded. It seems your father was a victim, not the perpetrator. That evening, Emily shared the revelations with Jonathan. He listened intently, his jaw tightening as she recounted the details. So his partner framed him? Jonathan asked, his tone laced with anger. It looks that way, Emily replied. But the damage was already done. His reputation, his career, it was all destroyed. Jonathan took her hands in his gaze steady. Then we need to set the record straight. But how? She asked, her voice heavy with doubt. It's been so long. Does it even matter anymore? It matters, he said firmly. Not just for your father's legacy, but for you. You deserve to carry the truth, not the weight of a lie. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. With Jonathan's support, Emily worked with the journalist to compile the evidence and prepare to go public. They decided to hold a press conference, inviting key members of the media to hear the full story. On the day of the conference, Emily stood at the podium, her heart pounding as cameras clicked and reporters murmured. Jonathan stood beside her, his presence a steadying force. My father was a good man, she began, her voice clear but emotional. He made mistakes, as we all do. But he didn't deserve what happened to him. Today, I'm here to share the truth, not just for him, but for everyone who has ever been judged unfairly. She went on to present the evidence, detailing the betrayal her father had faced and the steps she was taking to clear his name. As she spoke, she felt a sense of liberation, as though she was finally reclaiming a part of herself that had been lost. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Media outlets covered the story extensively, praising Emily's courage and integrity. Public opinion shifted, with many expressing outrage at the injustice her father had endured. But the most meaningful moment came when a former colleague of her father's reached out. He was one of the best men I ever worked with, the man said during a phone call. I always knew something wasn't right about how it all went down. I'm so glad the truth is finally coming out. Emily hung up the phone, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in years, she felt like her family's story had found closure. The press conference marked a significant turning point for Emily. For the first time in years, she felt like the shadow of her father's scandal no longer defined her. But as liberating as the moment was, it also brought new challenges. The revelation ignited conversations across media outlets and social circles. Some people praised Emily for her courage, while others speculated about the motives behind her decision to come forward now. The scrutiny was exhausting, but Emily stood firm, knowing she had done the right thing. Jonathan remained by her side through it all, offering encouragement and shielding her from the more vicious criticisms. You've faced worse than a few headlines, he reminded her one evening as they prepared for a gala celebrating the foundation's latest milestone. And look how far you've come. I know, Emily replied, smoothing the fabric of her gown. But sometimes it feels like no matter what I do, there's always someone waiting to tear me down. Jonathan turned her to face him, his expression serious. Then we'll keep proving them wrong. Together, the gala was held at a luxurious venue, its grand chandeliers and elegant decor a stark contrast to the modest diner where Emily and Jonathan had first met. As they walked through the crowd, Emily couldn't help but notice the curious glances and hushed whispers that followed them. "Isn't that Emily Carter?" someone murmured as they passed. "She's the one who cleared her father's name, right?" another voice replied. Emily held her head high, determined not to let the attention rattle her. But the evening took an unexpected turn when Victoria, ever the opportunist, approached them. "Emily," Victoria said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You've been quite the talk of the town lately." Emily returned the smile, her tone polite but firm. "Good to see you too, Victoria. I must admit, I didn't expect you to handle all this so gracefully," Victoria continued, her gaze sharp. "Though I suppose having Jonathan by your side makes it easier." Emily felt Jonathan's hand tighten slightly on her arm, a silent show of support. "I've learned that grace isn't about appearances," she replied. "It's about knowing who you are and standing by your truth." Victoria's smile faltered, but before she could respond, Jonathan stepped in. "If you'll excuse us, Victoria, we have other guests to greet." As they walked away, Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said softly. "You don't need to thank me," Jonathan replied. "But I won't let anyone make you feel less than you are." Despite the occasional challenges, Emily's confidence continued to grow. She threw herself into her work with the foundation, finding solace and purpose in the projects they spearheaded. One initiative, in particular, became her passion, a mentorship program for young women facing adversity. During a visit to one of the program's workshops, Emily met a teenage girl named Lily. Shy and reserved, Lily reminded Emily of herself at that age, determined but unsure of her place in the world. "You've been through a lot," Emily said gently as they sat together during a break. "But I can see how strong you are." Lily looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. "You think so?" "I know so," Emily replied with a smile. "And if you ever need someone to remind you, I'm here." The moment resonated deeply with Emily, reaffirming her commitment to using her platform for good. She knew what it felt like to be dismissed, to feel invisible, and she was determined to ensure no one else had to face that alone. But just as things seemed to be settling into a new normal, another challenge emerged. A rival businessman, jealous of Jonathan's success, began spreading rumors about the foundation's finances. The accusations were baseless, but they sparked enough controversy to warrant an investigation. Jonathan was furious. "This is nothing more than a smear campaign," he said as they sat in his office, reviewing the documents provided by their legal team. "They're trying to undermine everything we've built." Emily placed a hand on his arm, her voice calm but firm. "Then we'll fight back with the truth. Just like we always do." The investigation proved to be grueling, with auditors poring over every aspect of the foundation's operations. Emily and Jonathan worked tirelessly to provide the necessary documentation, refusing to let the ordeal derail their mission. Weeks later, the investigation concluded with a public statement exonerating the foundation of any wrongdoing. The rival businessman's attempt to tarnish their reputation had backfired spectacularly, leaving him facing legal consequences of his own. The victory was a bittersweet reminder of the challenges that came with their success. But for Emily, it also underscored the importance of resilience. She had faced countless obstacles, from her father's scandal to society's judgment, and emerged stronger each time. As she and Jonathan celebrated the foundation's vindication with their team, Emily couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. Their journey was far from over, but she knew they were ready for whatever came next. The investigation's conclusion brought a wave of relief, but Emily and Jonathan knew that their journey was far from over. The rival businessman's smear campaign had left ripples of doubt in certain circles, and regaining trust wasn't something that could happen overnight. Still, they pressed forward, determined to show the world that their work was rooted in integrity and genuine purpose. Emily threw herself into the mentorship program, finding it to be her safe haven amid the chaos. Each session with the young women in the program reminded her why she was fighting so hard. One day, as she prepared for a group discussion, Lily approached her, her usually shy demeanor replaced by an air of determination. Emily, she began hesitantly, clutching a notebook to her chest. I wanted to thank you. For what? Emily asked, smiling warmly. For believing in me, Lily said, her voice soft but steady. Because of you, I've started writing again. I used to love it, but I stopped when things got hard. Emily's heart swelled with pride. That's wonderful, Lily. Writing can be such a powerful way to express yourself. Lily nodded, her confidence growing. I want to share something I wrote at the next event. Do you think anyone would listen? Of course they would, Emily replied, her tone filled with encouragement. Your voice matters, Lily. Never doubt that. As the weeks went by, Emily's bond with the women in the mentorship program deepened. Their stories mirrored parts of her own, and she found herself opening up to them in ways she hadn't anticipated. Sharing her experiences with them felt cathartic, and in turn, their strength and resilience inspired her. One afternoon, during a particularly heartfelt session, one of the women asked a question that took Emily by surprise. How do you keep going when it feels like the world is against you? Emily paused, the weight of the question settling over her. I remind myself of why I started, she said after a moment. There were times when I wanted to give up, when it felt easier to let the world's opinions define me. But then I remembered that my story, my truth, matters. And so does yours. The room fell silent as the women absorbed her words. For Emily, it was a moment of clarity, a reminder of the power of authenticity and perseverance. While Emily found solace in the mentorship program, Jonathan was dealing with challenges of his own. The fallout from the investigation had strained some of his business relationships, and he spent long hours working to repair the damage. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Jonathan let out a tired sigh. I'm starting to think this life isn't meant to be easy, he said, half joking. Emily chuckled, leaning her head against his shoulder. If it were, we wouldn't appreciate the good parts as much. You're right, he said, his tone softening. But sometimes I wish the good parts lasted a little longer. They will, Emily said confidently. We've come this far, haven't we? He smiled, kissing her forehead. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd manage, she teased. But I'm glad you don't have to. Just as things seemed to be settling into a steady rhythm, another unexpected challenge arose. A tabloid published an exposé on Jonathan's family, dredging up old scandals and painting Emily as a manipulative outsider who had driven a wedge between him and his parents. The article was filled with half-truths and outright lies, but the damage was done. Emily's name trended on social media for all the wrong reasons, and the comments ranged from cruel speculation to outright harassment. Jonathan was livid. This is ridiculous, he fumed, pacing the living room. They'll print anything for attention. It's not worth it, Emily said, trying to calm him. People will believe what they want to believe. That doesn't make it right, he argued. You don't deserve this. I know, she replied softly. But I can't control what people say. All I can do is stay true to myself. Jonathan stopped pacing, his expression softening. You're stronger than anyone I know. And I have you to thank for that, she said, taking his hand. We'll get through this. We always do. Despite the noise, Emily and Jonathan refused to let the negativity define their lives. They focused on their work, their relationship, and the people who truly mattered. Slowly but surely, the public discourse began to shift. Supporters rallied around Emily, sharing her interview and stories about the foundation's impact. The mentorship program received an influx of donations, and invitations for Emily to speak at events poured in. One such event was a high-profile women's conference, where Emily was invited to deliver the keynote address. The thought of speaking in front of such a large audience was daunting, but Jonathan encouraged her to accept. You have something important to say, he told her. And people want to hear it. On the day of the conference, Emily stood backstage, her nerves threatening to overwhelm her. But as she stepped onto the stage and saw the faces of the audience, women of all ages, each with their own stories, she felt a sense of purpose wash over her. My name is Emily Carter, she began, her voice steady. And I want to tell you a story about resilience, redemption, and the power of believing in yourself. The speech was a resounding success, earning a standing ovation and cementing Emily's place as a voice for change. As she left the stage, she felt a newfound sense of confidence. The journey had been long and filled with obstacles, but she was finally beginning to see the impact of her efforts. Still, the challenges weren't over. As Emily and Jonathan prepared for the next phase of their work, they knew the road ahead would be just as demanding. But they were ready to face it, together. The applause from the women's conference still rang in Emily's ears as she and Jonathan returned to their apartment that evening. It had been a monumental moment for her, a chance to reclaim her narrative on a stage that mattered. But as the glow of the event began to fade, the weight of the public scrutiny they'd been under crept back in. Emily curled up on the couch, gazing out at the city lights. "Do you ever wonder if it's all worth it?" she asked softly. Jonathan, sitting beside her, turned to face her. "What do you mean?" "All of it," she said, gesturing vaguely. "The fighting, the headlines, the constant pressure to prove ourselves. I just wonder if we're chasing something that will never be enough." Jonathan took her hand, his expression serious. "I think it's worth it if it means we're staying true to who we are. We're not just chasing success, Emily. We're building something meaningful. For us, and for the people we're helping." She nodded, his words resonating with her. "Sometimes it just feels so exhausting." "I know," he said, squeezing her hand, "but you don't have to carry it all on your own. We're in this together." Their relationship grew stronger in the face of adversity, but the challenges kept coming. The tabloid scandal had strained Jonathan's relationship with his parents, who had always been wary of Emily. His mother, in particular, had been vocal about her doubts, insisting that Emily was bringing unnecessary complications into their lives. Jonathan decided it was time to address the issue head-on. One weekend, he invited his parents to lunch at a private club, determined to clear the air. Emily was reluctant to join, but Jonathan convinced her that they needed to face the tension together. The atmosphere was tense from the moment they arrived. Jonathan's mother, Eleanor, greeted Emily with a tight smile, while his father, Richard, remained silent, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for coming," Jonathan said, breaking the awkward silence as they sat down. "I thought it was time we had an honest conversation." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "About what exactly?" "About us," Jonathan replied firmly. "About Emily and the way you've treated her." Emily shifted uncomfortably, but Jonathan placed a reassuring hand on hers. "I know this hasn't been easy for you," he continued, addressing his parents. "But Emily is my partner. She's not just someone I'm dating, she's the person I want to spend my life with. And I need you to respect that." Eleanor's expression softened slightly, but her voice was still guarded. "Jonathan, it's not that we don't want you to be happy. We just worry about how complicated things have become since Emily entered your life." Emily spoke up, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I understand your concerns. And I know my past isn't what you would have chosen for Jonathan. But I love him. And I'm committed to building a life with him, no matter what challenges we face." Richard finally spoke, his tone thoughtful. "Emily, no one doubts your sincerity. But you have to understand, as Jonathan's parents, we want to protect him. And the scrutiny you both have been under, it's hard to watch." "I understand that," Emily said. "But I also know that Jonathan is stronger than you think. And together, we're even stronger." There was a long pause before Eleanor finally sighed, her shoulders relaxing. "You're right. Jonathan is strong. And if he believes in you, then maybe we need to as well." It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. As the weeks turned into months, Emily and Jonathan continued to build their life together. The foundation's initiatives flourished, their relationship deepened, and the lingering doubts from Jonathan's family began to fade. But just as they thought they were finally on solid ground, a new challenge emerged, this time, from someone Emily hadn't expected to hear from again. One afternoon, as she was leaving a mentorship session, she received a call from an unknown number. Hesitating for a moment, she answered. "Hello." "Emily," the voice on the other end said, familiar yet distant. "It's Michael. Your father's old business partner." Emily froze, her heart racing. "Michael? I know I'm the last person you want to hear from," he said quickly, "but I've been following the news. I saw your interview, and I need to talk to you. Her grip on the phone tightened. Why now? After all these years? Because there's more to the story than you know, he said, his voice heavy with regret. And I owe it to you to tell the truth. Emily met Michael in a quiet cafe a few days later, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, curiosity, and apprehension. He looked older, his once imposing figure now slightly hunched, his face lined with guilt. Thank you for coming, he said as she sat down. Don't thank me, she replied coldly. Just tell me why you reached out. Michael sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. Because I've been carrying this guilt for years. Your father, he didn't deserve what happened to him. And I was part of the reason he lost everything. Emily's stomach churned as he began to explain. He admitted to orchestrating the scheme that had implicated her father, using him as a scapegoat to protect himself. But he also revealed something she hadn't expected. Her father had discovered the truth before his death and had been gathering evidence to clear his name. I didn't know he was still investigating, Michael said, his voice breaking. But when he died, I realized the extent of what I'd done. And I've regretted it every day since. Emily's mind raced. The revelation was both devastating and empowering. Her father had been fighting to restore his legacy, even in his final days. And now, she had the power to finish what he'd started. Emily left the cafe with her thoughts swirling. Michael's confession had opened old wounds but also given her a sense of purpose. Her father's fight to clear his name wasn't over, and she was determined to finish what he started. As she stepped into the cool evening air, her phone buzzed. It was Jonathan. How did it go? He asked, concern lacing his voice. It was a lot, Emily admitted, her voice trembling. But I know what I need to do now. Tell me everything when you get home, he said gently. We'll figure it out together. Over the next few weeks, Emily and Jonathan worked tirelessly to piece together the evidence her father had collected. Michael, racked with guilt, provided key documents and agreed to testify about his role in the scheme. The process was grueling, but Emily's resolve never wavered. Jonathan stood by her every step of the way, offering support and encouragement during the long nights and moments of doubt. You're incredible, he told her one evening as they pored over files at the dining table. Your father would be so proud of you. Thank you, she said softly, squeezing his hand. I just hope this will finally bring him the justice he deserves. The day of the hearing arrived, and Emily sat in the courtroom, her heart pounding as the evidence was presented. Michael's testimony was a turning point, his detailed account of the fraud and betrayal leaving no doubt about her father's innocence. As the judge delivered the final verdict, declaring her father's name cleared, Emily felt an overwhelming sense of relief and pride. Jonathan, sitting beside her, took her hand and whispered, "You did it." "No," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "We did it." News of the verdict spread quickly, and the public response was overwhelmingly positive. Emily's courage and determination captured the hearts of many, and her father's legacy was finally restored. The mentorship program she had championed saw a surge of support, and new opportunities began to pour in. At a celebration hosted by the foundation, Emily took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought her to this point. Surrounded by friends, supporters, and the women she had inspired, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. Jonathan approached her, a glass of champagne in hand. "To you," he said, raising his glass. "For your strength, your courage, and your heart." "To us," she replied, clinking her glass against his. "For never giving up, no matter what." The following week, Emily stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new community center funded by the foundation. The building was dedicated to her father's memory, a testament to his values and the resilience he had instilled in her. As she addressed the crowd, her voice steady and filled with emotion, she spoke about the importance of perseverance and the power of truth. "This center isn't just about honoring the past," she said. "It's about creating a future where everyone has a chance to rise above their circumstances." The applause was thunderous, and as Emily looked out at the faces in the crowd, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her journey hadn't been easy, but it had brought her to a place of purpose and peace. Later that evening, as she and Jonathan sat together on their balcony, watching the city lights twinkle below, she rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she asked. "Every day," he replied, his voice soft. "And I know this is just the beginning." She smiled, feeling the truth of his words. Their love had weathered storms, their mission had inspired change, and their story was far from over. Together, they had built something unshakable, a life defined not by wealth or status, but by resilience, love, and the unwavering belief in each other. And so, their story became a testament to the power of second chances, the courage to face the past, and the strength to build a brighter future. It was a story that would be remembered, not just for the challenges they had overcome, but for the hope they had inspired in others.